Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it doesn't get said enough, but it's so important to preserve legacy. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and talk about current projects, influences, why they're telling this story, given story at a given time, and, well, so very much more that we can think of in a light and a conversational matter. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and I certainly hope that you do, you can find us over at Spotify, over at Apple, or you can find every single one of our episodes archived over on our YouTube channel. Also, we'd love it if you'd follow us on social media as well for all sorts of updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at In the Seats and at It's Podcast One for any of your updated needs for what we have going on. And finally, and probably most importantly, really, we'd love it if you follow us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where our hardworking team is cracking away on movie news, reviews, and, well, anything else we can think of, to be perfectly honest, because we like to have fun over there and like to mix it up, and we hope that you do too. But on this episode, we are talking with the directors of the brand new documentary about Lennox Lewis, called Lennox Lewis, The Untold Story. We sit down with directors Seth Koch and Laze just to talk about sort of how they got involved with Lennox and how they started to tell this story, and just sort of, I guess, not just the legacy of Lennox, but just the importance of sort of laying it out the way it was, because it's a film that shows not only the highs but the lows as well, and it really goes beyond Lennox Lewis as just an athlete, but it's really about Lennox Lewis, the human being, which is where the film breaks from a lot of other sports documentaries that we may see. And it's a fascinating watch, especially if you were a fan of his back in the day, or still are now, because Lennox is a remarkable guy, and hope you enjoy our talk with Seth and Rick, because I know I certainly did.
Hey Seth, what year were we in Toronto?
16.
2006. When were we in Toronto?
2016.
16.
September.
Okay.
It was during the Toronto International Film Festival.
Yeah.
Turn your
Probably past you in a hallway somewhere.
So we met Scorsese and Chad Verdi, who ended up, and Emma Tillinger, who produces all of Marty's movies. She did The Irishman, and she produced Joker also.
Wild.
And they have helped us throughout this whole road that we've taken and finally finished up, after 5 years.
Well, you know what, honestly, man, just first off, to kick it off, I just want to say, hey, to both of you, thank you for the time today, and congratulations on the film, man. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
No, I mean, I guess my first question is, did you approach Lennox? Did Lennox approach you? How did the ball on this ultimately start rolling?
Lennox and I have been friends for 20 years. And so actually you'll see some Hitchcock kind of cameos of me at some of the fights. So I was at most of these fights, including the one in South Africa, where he lost against Rockman. We had this, Seth and I wanted to do this movie for many years, and we continued to pursue Lennox. He was initially not too excited about it, but he finally relented, and we began that process. And so we started it up in Kitchener. I guess, did we shoot in New York before then, Seth?
We shot New York in August of 2016, and then we scheduled like a 5-day sort of stint in Toronto and Kitchener in September. And that's where we shot a big bulk of the movie.
Well, and I mean, it's one of those sports docs that, I mean, I've always been a fan of Lennox, and I've loved his entire career. But when you see sports docs, you don't always necessarily see them embrace sort of the moments where they lose. And I mean, it seems like this is a story where Lennox seems to want to make a point of sort of highlighting, yeah, I lost, but this is how I came back from that. Like, how big of a sell was it to sort of get the entire story as opposed to just the highlights, quote unquote?
It was
Good.
go ahead. Go ahead. Well, I think it was really critical that we were not just this was not meant to just be a sports documentary. It was meant to peel back sort of the veneer of a heavyweight champion and look at what made him tick. And part of that was how he overcame loss, because it's something that we all have to do. It's something that would speak to a larger audience. And part of that was not just his upbringing, his relationship with his mother, and eventually the team that he oriented himself with. All of those things were helpful for him in seeing past obstacles, no matter what the obstacle was, whether it was not being accepted by the boxing community, whether it was, losing, whether it was having challenges like Mike Tyson insult him. All of those things are obstacles he had to overcome. And the team that he assembled helped him do that. And also his personal experiences were part of how he overcame that.
Now, I mean, how much, I'm always curious, how much how much research do you have to do before you can even start having sort of boots on the ground and talking to people? Because I mean, I can imagine going through old footage and archival stuff is a huge part of the job for a film like this.
Yeah, it was a massive part of the film.
Hundreds of hours of video that combined with what we acquired, what we shot. We shot in, in I guess 4 different countries. We interviewed dozens of people, and we tried to understand why we are so attracted to the train wreck, and why Mike Tyson's a household word, and Lennox, who did everything right and lived his life honorably and worked hard and diligently. Nobody seems to know who he is, and that's part of what our the backbone of the story was. Despite the fact that when they finally met in the ring, Lennox destroyed him.
Well, and I mean, I'm always amazed at just, especially looking back on his entire career, Lennox was never sort of about the braggadocious moments, about sort of the I'm going to eat your fan. Like, it was always psychological swagger. It was, I'm better than you and I'm going to put you on your ass. And I'm kind of curious, as you guys sort of dove into a lot of those sort of aspects about how there was a lot of pushback about him being heavyweight champion. I'm kind of curious, was it just that he wasn't from America, or was it that he wasn't sort of buying into sort of the bombacity of the sport at the time?
I think it's because he wasn't American. I think he had identity issues across the board. Canadians, when he went back to England, were a little bit, aggrieved about that. The British were like, yeah, but you're not British, you're Canadian. So he kind of was like in this place where nobody accepted him. He kind of had to prove himself from the outset to everyone. And the issue with the way Americans perceived him had a lot to do with Don King. Don King was the, quintessential boxing promoter, had his hooks into Mike Tyson, had his hooks into Evander Holyfield. He was trying to control the whole, scene at the time. And Lennox was not buying into that. And so because of that, he was kind of always seen as the nemesis. He was kind of seen as, the British opposition to this American institution that is being the heavyweight champion of the world.
When assembling sort of people to talk to, did anybody push back? Because I mean, I can imagine if you'd asked Don, it may not have been a sort of a positive yes to talk about this.
Nobody really pushed back. Everybody loves Lennox. It's funny. He's such a dominant figure in such a macho sport. In 20 years, I've never seen him raise his voice. He's really a pussycat, and he's a lion and a pussycat. And so everybody that we asked to be part of it was happy to do it. And for us, one of the highlights was the interview with Jim Lampley. It was like talking to the boxing god. The guy is so charismatic and so knowledgeable about the history of boxing. we appreciated that he and all the people we interviewed, were so willing to give of their time and to talk about their experiences.
Tyson, I mean, the fact that Mike Tyson, decided to give us an interview was a big moment. I think at that point I knew this is real. Like, if Mike Tyson is willing to give of his time to talk about Lennox, the guy that beat him, there's something more there than just, a rivalry. There's a deeper relationship. And so I was really glad we got to explore that a little bit.
Was Lennox hands-on in this process, or was he sort of confident enough, or did you have to sell him enough to be able to for him to lay back and let you guys do the work?
Go ahead, Rick.
Lennox is a very private person, and he was reluctant to open up, particularly emotionally. Dr. Dre was really helpful there. When Dre got involved in the project, he influenced us and leaned on Lennox to talk about some of the things that were more emotional, some of his insecurities. Lennox was, not involved in the day-to-day, editing or production, but he certainly was very vocal about his legacy. But we were careful to make sure that this wasn't a fluff piece. This wasn't, we wanted to show his insecurities. We wanted to show his losses. And I can tell you, I was in Johannesburg when Rockman knocked him out, and our crew, which there were a bunch of us, I guess there were 25 or 30 of us that were with him, were just down and tearful and feeling like the world was over. And Lennox got up the next morning and said, "Let's go on a safari. I'm gonna kick his ass. Don't worry about it. We're gonna get a rematch." And never showed any remorse, or concern. And then he got back and trained, and of course destroyed Rockman in the second one. It's amazing the people around him. He has friends all over the world, and they're all very warm and commenting, accepting, and beautiful. They're all good looking. The shots, of course, his wife is amazingly beautiful, and Violet, and his kids, and Courtney Shan, and all the guys. I mean, everybody. It was an honor to work with such a positive group of people.
And I was amazed after talking with him earlier this week. I mean, he seems very much like a guy who was never concerned about sort of the moments when he fell, but much more concerned about how he got back up. And I mean, it makes for a much more inspirational and a much more motivational story. And I'm kind of curious, from both your perspectives, is that really sort of the essence of the man himself? Because it seems like, again, he's more concerned about being a champion in life as opposed to just the win-loss record, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that one of the things that we discovered early on was this relationship with his mother, and how critical that was to the development of his, sort of psyche, or the way he was goal oriented. But being abandoned by his mom and having to go through that whole piece of his life by himself, and then finally coming back together with her, I think that gave him, I mean, if you can forgive your mom for something like that, it's hard. It's hard to see him holding grudges and being angry at people for petty things. He was above the fray, and so it wasn't just about the boxing. He's like, I'm a pugilist specialist, which is a very erudite thing to say, but that really speaks to what his mindset was. It was a game of chess. It wasn't just about winning in the ring or getting knocked out or knocking other people out. It was about an image, projecting an image of smarts, of strategy, of perfection. Really, he was a perfectionist in a lot of ways, and so I think that runs through his whole life, and so it's easy to see, or through all the different parts of his life. So it's easy to see how it seems like he's disaffected by winning in the ring, but he's not. Obviously, that is a huge moment for him when he becomes the heavyweight champion, undisputed, of the world. But it's just it's part of the philosophy of his life, I think. And that's why it seems like even outside of the ring, he's really focused on being the best dad by, like, I always want to win, right? I've always got to be the best is what he says, right? But the philosophy really is that he wants to do it the right way, and he wants to set an example for others.
Well, and I mean, I love that it feels like, especially, and this comes through in the film, that maybe one of his more prouder professional moments actually came out of a loss when he, decided to bring Manny Stewart into the team and just sort of decide to, rebuild himself the right way and not just be awarded the title, but win the title for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another piece of the story that really, I think, kicked it into another gear, was understanding how important Emmanuel Stewart was to the development of Lennox, the boxer, the champion. I really wish, it's too bad that we didn't get to interview him. I really wish we would have had the chance, because I think he would have had a lot of amazing insights about Lennox that nobody else would have had. But what we were able to glean out of him was this philosophy, again, of picking the man apart, knowing who the man is, and helping him achieve perfection by knowing who he was, instead of trying to throw him into a mold or say, you have to do this or you have to do that. Just rest, come into camp, just sleep. Like, that was such an important insight from Courtney Shand, that he just wants to get them all like synced up. He wants to get them, calmed down and focused, almost like it's, like a guru, right? Like you're like in a yoga class. He wants to center you before you start moving forward. So yeah, that was a critical piece of Lennox's success.
Now, when you're going into something like this, and especially when you're talking to people, sort of have boots on the ground and doing interviews, do you know where the movie's going to go, or is it just a question of you have to sort of let your subjects sort of guide you in the right way? I'm always kind of curious about that process, because I mean, I imagine you're going to guide them a little bit, but at the same time, if they're going to say something and the camera's on, you're going to let them do it.
Funny you say that, because this movie, that's why it took 5 years to bring to the theaters. We were through countless re-edits and reshoots and finding the right tempo, finding the right focus was which kept changing because we were learning about the story. And then when Dr. Dre got involved, it changed again dramatically. Dre spent hours and hours and hours with us dissecting the film, asking us, why are you highlighting this? What's important about this? This is exploitative. You don't need to go this. At one point we had more coverage of Don King, and Dre said, everybody knows, who Don King is and what he's about. You don't need to. That's not a news story. And so no, we it was like a treasure hunt. We and that's just our style. There are other documentarians that work in a different style and that plan it out and then find footage that fits their story. We're producing and directing a new film about Kelly Maloney right now, which is an amazing story in itself. Her transformation and how Lennox and his crew accepted her. Like Courtney said at one point in the movie, well, if Lennox accepted Kelly for what she was, then I guess I could accept her too. And you're talking about guys that are the most misogynistic, sexist guys, in a brutal business. To accept someone that's going through a transition, a gender transition, is pretty amazing that Lennox was able to accept Kelly. So now that story, we're doing more research and following a storyline a little bit more, that's designed from a script. It's still, of course, being a documentary, it goes everywhere. You don't know where it's going, but at least we have a direction. But Lennox, there was no direction. We just jumped in and started hanging out with him and filming, and we alone filmed, over 100 hours of tape in addition to all the archival footage. So yeah, it was a work in progress, and it even just finding the central theme, of which we believe is, who do we accept as our heroes, and who do we look towards, and why are we attracted to the train wreck so much in society? Even getting to that, even getting to the title, it changed 3 or 4 or 5 times, and then changed again when we finally made a deal for distribution. It was called Tough Love for about 1.5 years, and at the last minute, the distributor.
When somebody cuts a check, then they want to change the title. You change the title. I understand.
That's exactly right. and we were really upset about it, for a minute. Oh no, that's our title, Tough Love. That's what it's about. And they were like, yeah, well, if you want to sell it, you got to put Lennox in the name, because that's what it's about. So we agreed, and it was the right choice. Yeah.
But I love that you brought up the moment with Kelly, because it really does highlight how determined he was to sort of build this family bubble around him, especially in such a horrible business. And it really does parallel, interestingly, with somebody like Ali's life, who, especially when he was fighting, was struggling to build that family around him, and it didn't always work quite as well. And especially just towards the end of the film, where you do highlight how important it was for Lennox to be a part of the funeral procession, and be a part of that, and sort of participate in that. And it really does sort of highlight sort of how unique Lennox was for his era, because you can say Tyson and even Holyfield and so many of the other guys were trying to be Ali, but it had too much of a nasty sort of edge to it, whereas Lennox really defined his own space in the sport. And I think that made him more like Ali than more sort of the other guys who were trying to be like Ali.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the things we kind of grappled with is, how do you compare boxers? Everybody wants to know, like, who would beat who, who's the best, all of that sort of stuff. So, like, pretty early on in the film, we kind of give all these titles out to these different boxers, and we're basically trying to, as Rick was saying, sort of allude to this theme of, who are these, like, what does it mean to be a champion? What does it mean to be the best? What does it mean to sit, to hold this throne, as it were? And that was the enigma, and that's part of why it took so long to finally finish this film, was because Lennox didn't really fit any molds. He wasn't trying to be the baddest, or he wasn't trying to be, he was trying to be a pugilist specialist. And he said that to us so many times, in interviews and just in talking, that, and I had to look it up to know what that meant. And it is true, that is what he is. But I think, it speaks to his idea of, he's not trying to fit some sort of expectation. It's not him conforming himself to the outside. It's him following knowing himself and following his inner truth. And that's what makes him so unique. I think that's really what made him unparalleled in the ring in a lot of ways.
For sure. Now, I guess just to put a bow on this, and I'm kind of curious from your perspective. In the history of boxing, there have been such a wide array of personalities, from the Alis to the Don Kings to the Joe Louis to the Camachos to the Jake LaMottas, and there's always this wide ranging spectrum of either positive stories or not so positive stories. And I'm kind of curious, what is it about the sport that creates these characters, and why did Lennox sort of, I don't want to say rise above, but rise to like sort of a different place in that kind of pantheon?
I think what distinguished Lennox, and Lampley talked about it, is that he controlled his own destiny. He was his own master. He made his own decisions. Mike always served another master, many other masters, not only Don King, but the people that were around him that were using him, and so Lennox, excelled and differentiated himself is because he always followed his own voice. And I think that's probably different because most boxers and probably a lot of athletes, are, their path is driven by their managers or agents or promoters or mentors or whoever it is that's guiding them, on this journey. Whereas Lennox controlled his own journey, and I think that's probably the one thing that really differentiated him from other champions.
And it speaks to the sport itself as well, wanting to be a pugilist specialist as opposed to a fighter, I guess is the right way to define it.
Right.
But you know what, guys, that's it for me. I just want to say thank
you.
you so much for the time and congratulations on the film. I really loved it.
David, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.